Hi everybody, we are going to talk about 10 top QA interview questions. I shared a pie and you guys can see what kind of question you mostly like to get during the interview. It's gonna be soft skill questions. And then I will have two videos and one it's gonna be programming language questions, MySQL and API testing. And then second video gonna be just the soft skill questions. And first question gonna be for sure they're gonna ask you, tell me about yourself. So you need to start to tell about yourself as I mentioned in here with the you need to talk about your experience, where did you work and methodology, what kind of methodology you worked, and then you can talk about your framework, and then you guys can talk about the page object, which page factor framework, and you can mention functional structural implementation, and then you need to talk about the testing types as a functional regression and smoke testing. And then really important smoke testing, you need to mention like how often you need to do the smoke testing. And you can talk about the manual testing as well. I know you guys create automation engineer, but still we need to write manual testing as well. And then you need to talk about the test scripts such as data driven, behavior driven, and then hybrid framework. And then you guys need to mention you are so comfortable to using the Java, Selenium WebDriver, Maven, Cucumber, TestNG, and then you guys can talk about the Git and Jenkins. And then you guys can talk about the Postman API testing with the if you can give the example of the API testing, and then POM XML BDD. Second question gonna be about tell me about your project. So when you're telling about your project, you don't need to go so detailed, but still you need to mention about your project, like step definition, drivers, runner, utilities, if you are working with the Java. And then if you are working with the Python, you can mention about the PyTest, and you can talk about your packages, files. And we need to mention during the project, we use like a page object model and with the page factory, and what those, like why we need those, because we need to keep our code is organized and clean, right? So when you telling like what we have in our framework, you guys need to mention like what's in there and what's the purpose for we have in those packages. And then you guys need to mention also why we need to use Git, and we need to talk about the report such a HTML report, and then we need to talk about the maximum scenario coverage. You guys can check the detail online. And then third question gonna be what regression and functional testing is. You need to explain them basically, and then if they ask you more detail with the example, you can give example from your project easily. And then for number 4, overloading and overriding, which is they love to ask these questions. And then you need to talk about the overloading. If there's a two method with same method name but different parameters, signature must be different, and you need to give example. And then you need to talk about the overriding as I mentioned in here. And then if you guys gonna talk about the override, like with throws the exceptions, you guys can mention those. And then next question gonna be what static and dynamic polyform is. And I explained already here, if you guys give some example as well during the interview, it will be really good for you. And then let's move to the Java questions. They always like to ask array and array list. What's the differences between? And then they like to ask example of array list. I never seen any question like give me example of the array. Usually they like to ask about the array list and then linked list sometimes. You just need to give good example from your project. It will be really good. And then API testing. So I share like more than actually 1 pages for the API testing, and then I try to cover more questions because they can ask you a lot of question about it. And then they always like to ask HTTP methods. So during the like Postman, we used to get post, put, and delete. But usually in my project, I don't use the delete. It's not my responsibility, and I don't know about you guys. But I always like personally, I always use the get and post methods. And then they like to ask about the status codes. You can talk about the 200, 400, and then 500. And I didn't give more detail. Actually, there's a more than that. There's a 201 created, and then they do have like more, but these are the basic one. But you guys can search more online and you can see. And other question is, how do web services communicate with each other? So basically we do request and respond, right? And then we need to talk about those, and you guys can talk about more detail. And we have API testing tool like a REST, SOAP UI, and we can mention this. Currently, I'm using just Postman, rest assured, and yeah, that's all. And I don't know about you guys. Depends of the project, but right now those two I use. How do you perform GET request? Um, I give one example here, and then how do you assert status code using Hemcrest? This is really important actually. They always asking to me when I'm having interview. And so right now is MySQL, and then SQL and MySQL, basically their query is pretty much the same. And they usually ask like what's the database, so basic questions, and we always use during the work, so easy to explain. Um, So I just mentioned here we store data into separate tables that are related to each other. Data is organized into database tables. All data need to store somewhere. And then if you guys use the MySQL workbench and connect to the AWS, if you guys use during the currently work, and then you can mention that too. I don't mention it here because not all company use AWS. And then in MySQL, we have primary key and foreign key. These are really important. I explain right here. And then let's move to last questions. And how do validate test front end? How do validate test back end? These are the killer questions. So basically, create a bank account, enter in personal info, and enter password and confirm account. This is the ID number. So you need to confirm that. And then other question is same question with the back end testing. So basically, you need to check if account was added correctly and in timely manner, and then select all from account, where account ID, and then like I just give the bank account example, but if you work in the hospital, you will have like a patient ID, as well, and you can do the same thing. So method it's never change, just the IDs changing, and then whatever the name you use, those are the change. So those are the 10 questions mostly company like to ask about it. So thank you guys watching that.